In 2023, Woody Allen is a problematic figure, respected for his directing and filmmaking, but held at arm's length for his personal life, which is certainly sketchy and possibly criminal. But in 1977, he was at the height of his powers as an actor, comedian, writer, etc. It would probably be easier to list the show business fields he hadn't conquered. I don't believe he was a mime, but I could be wrong. Annie Hall, his biggest hit and critical success, won Best Picture that year, despite competing with a little indie pick by George Lucas. Combining postmodern ideas of film structure with metatextual elements, this movie manages to get laughs in a completely revolutionary way. The innovations in Annie Hall are so powerful they came to mark comedy forever. But can we stand watching an intimate, though fictional, portrait of someone as troubled and troubling as Woody Allen? It might be as awkward as Annie and Alvy's first meeting. So pour yourself some chilled white wine and let's cringe together. It's time for episode 79 of Toasting the Classics, Annie Hall. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, podcast where we take something that people call a classic and drink something inspired by the classic while we talk about it and decide if it's still a classic. My name's Dave McArthur.
Yeah, and my name is Clint Lanier. Welcome to our little podcast here.
It's not so little.
Well,
it's not so little.
It's getting bigger. 5 people is pretty big.
5 people starting to move up there. That's
all
right.
Considering.
Getting out of the podcast basement.
So what are we doing this week, Dave?
This week we're doing your pick. It was film.
It is my pick.
You had a film for a pick. You picked something near and dear to me geographically, if not to my heart. Annie Hall.
Yeah.
Maybe not Woody Allen's number one New York love piece, but it's definitely about New York in a lot of ways. What were you thinking when you picked it? Why'd you go for this?
I wanted to do one of Woody Allen's. You know, we don't shy away from the controversial here at Toasting the Classics.
Oh, no.
Woody Allen is kind of like, we've done Bill Cosby. We haven't done Michael Jackson yet, but we probably will eventually. But
right.
You know, it's these people that they have been canceled, but they were canceled at a certain point in their life. It was like when all their good stuff was done, then they got canceled, right? And so there's this tension about art that, okay, they're canceled and they're despicable and we don't like them, but can we still like what they did? Can we still like what they made? Like Roman Polanski, can we still watch Rosemary's Baby and enjoy it? Or Chinatown, one of the all-time masterpieces, and say, this is a great film, but he's a piece of poo, you know?
Yeah, it's so Roman Polanski, although he is in Chinatown, you do see his face in the film. So that's not entirely to the point that I'm saying, but you're not looking at Roman Polanski the whole time. Like It's a little bit with Michael Jackson is kind of in between. You're hearing Michael Jackson. I wouldn't watching his videos is weird. No, his
it is. Yes,
I watched Bad when we did the episode about Weird Al Yankovic, just to sort of remember the spots for the original, and I do it backward and forward, and it was just weird to see him. It's kind of creepy to sit there and look at him.
That's true.
And Woody Allen. So obviously, there's a spectrum of how much the artist is the art, and then there's a spectrum of what they're accused of doing.
Right.
I don't know where Bill Cosby versus Roman Polanski would lie, but that's the worst, I think, of these. Oh, I don't know. I don't know the details of the Michael Jackson case. It sounds like it could have been pretty horrible. I don't really know enough.
Right.
Woody Allen's pretty bad, but it's a little bit less than the others from what I've heard. We can get into that a little bit more later, but I think watching a Woody Allen movie, especially this one, you're watching Woody Allen. If you don't like Woody Allen, you're not going to like this movie. This movie is Woody Allen talking to you for an hour and a half.
And you're watching it in his prime. This is 1977. He was like 40 years old.
Yep.
He'd been
42.
42. Okay.
Part of my biggest surprise is actually how old he was when he did this. This is not a young
he was born
man.
in 35, I think.
1935. He's going to be 90 in a couple of years here. In 2 years.
He's going to be 90. So I knew I wanted to do Woody Allen, but I just didn't know.
Okay.
You know, I've seen one Woody Allen film, and that was Bananas or whatever it's called, Going Bananas or something like that.
Oh, okay.
It was one of the slapsticks, I guess late 60s. And that was the only one I'd ever seen from him. And I saw it a long time ago. But, you know, you hear Woody Allen this and Woody Allen that all the time, and a master filmmaker, and people are upset about, again, the Pharaoh situation, which we'll talk about. However, you know, other people argue you can't cancel Woody Allen. He's a genius. So I was like, okay, let's find out what the big deal is.
Right.
And I started researching, you know, what are his biggest. Out of his biggest, this is supposed to be like the prime Woody Allen, because he got a best director, he got best original screenplay. Diane Keaton got best actress, and then it got another award. I can't remember what the other award was off the top of my head. Um,
It's best screenplay. He got it with Brickman together.
okay, guess
Best
best
director for
screenplay.
him.
Uh-huh.
It's best. He was nominated for best actor and didn't
Okay.
win. She won best actor and it won best picture. So had it
Yeah,
won
okay.
best actor, it would have been one of the only four films in history to win all
Right.
five top
So it
categories.
was awfully close. So this is
It was really close. Yeah.
this is considered his major of his major work. I think because it was decorated so much. I think it's
Also,
AFI's.
if you adjust for inflation, this is
Mhm.
his biggest box office hit.
Right, right.
So that, I mean, that there's that, and it's also like I said before, this is Woody Allen. You're watching Woody Allen for an hour
Yeah,
and a half.
yeah, for
It's
sure,
hard. His
for
face
sure.
is hardly ever off the screen. Half the
Yes,
time he's breaking the fourth wall and talking right at
yes.
you.
I would venture to guess. I think he's in every scene.
I mean, there's some cuts where you're seeing her on the other end of a phone
Yeah,
conversation, stuff like
true.
that. There's his family a few times, but he's
Okay,
he's
yeah,
front. I mean, it'd be
yeah.
trivial to say that he's not in the scene, and he's either
Right,
talking on the
right.
phone or it's his
Yes.
family. Or this is about Woody
It
Allen.
wasn't a Hitchcock cameo. It was a front and center. Well, he I mean, so this movie is sort of supposed to be autobiographical. It's supposed to be about sort of about his relationship with Diane Keaton because the two of them were a couple for a very brief time, about 1 or 2 years, and
Okay.
it's sort of based on their relationship. So he
I
cast
kind of missed that. I was looking for
himself.
that because I
Mhm.
knew the movie was written like for Diane Keaton.
Right.
So it is kind of supposed to be about her. I didn't really
Yes.
realize that.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think Hall is her mom's maiden name or something like that. There's a
Huh.
reason why like the name is significant as well. Yeah, so they have
Sometimes I have to make cuts when it comes to doing the research, and Diane Keaton was like fourth on the list of things I wanted to read about.
right.
I just didn't get
Yeah,
into her background as
right.
much as I probably should have, because that would make. I was wondering about the name of the film, Annie Hall. Like,
Uh-huh.
I, there were a whole bunch of different ideas for what to name the movie, but I wondered
Mhm.
why they landed on that and what the meaning of that was. And I guess I had always thought that probably was some kind of a reference to something. And knowing Woody Allen, I figured it was a reference to something in like expressionist French cinema or something like
Yeah,
that. But
right, right. Long and the short of it, for those who haven't seen this movie, Woody Allen is himself essentially. He's a stand-up comedian in New York, and
mhm.
he's a fairly prominent stand-up comedian. He does the Tonight Show. He's doing all the rounds. He's doing political things, and he meets this up-and-coming actress through a friend of his. Her name is Annie Hall. She immediately likes him, and he like I said, he is himself. So Woody Allen became known for the neurotic, very Jewish type of guy, that, oh, I can't do anything right because I'm Jewish, or I can't fix a
Right.
car. What are you talking about? This type of stuff. And he's very neurotic, and he has mommy issues and all this other stuff. And it's evolved since then, but that he was kind of known as that. And so he is that in this movie. And in real life, it's not a stage act, that's him, but she's somehow attracted to that. And they start a
I think he
relationship.
does play up. I think he does play
I
up
I, I
the
definitely think he plays it
the
up. Yeah.
neurotic Jewish guy, and maybe even kind of created that stereotype in
I
some
think
way.
he did. All I'm saying is that his character in the movie is the
Mhm.
same as his stage act. That's
It's
all I'm saying.
yes, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah,
So
it's the
so
same as his stage
I'm not
persona.
saying
Right,
he's like that.
right.
I'm just saying that this character who's Alvy Singer
Yes.
his is like that stage act. So like I said, somehow she's attracted to that, and he's and they have this wild relationship. It shows kind of the portions of a relationship. At the very beginning, it's very hot. They're doing it all the time. Then there's the middle when they start to cool down a little bit. And then there's the end where, things have definitely stopped. The magic is no longer there. Although he wants to get it back, maybe for sentimental reasons, but she's moved on. And
It's
there's a lot of detail in there, but that's sort of it. And it's very funny, like you said. He breaks
it
the
is
fourth
very funny.
wall throughout,
Yeah.
talking to the audience, saying, can you believe this guy? Or see, here's what
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about, as she's explaining why she doesn't want to have sex with him or whatever.
Yeah, one of the themes that goes through, and it goes through a lot of his movies, and it's got to be a part of what it's like to be Woody Allen in real life, is that, like we're watching it and she meets him and she's like attracted to him and really wants to go out with him. And it's like, what
Yeah.
is going on there? Why would this woman?
Right.
But it's because she's not super bright and he
Uh,
is, and
hmm
she's attracted to that.
hmm
And it's a theme in Woody Allen's movies that there are women out there who are very attracted to a really smart guy.
Yeah.
And then I've always thought that the other part of that is that kind of fades pretty fast.
hmm
Like I don't think a woman, once she gets to know you, she's not that interested in how smart you are. I think
Right, right, right.
that fades a lot faster than physical
Yeah.
attraction,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Well,
So
I think there's a statement in that. There's one part again where he breaks the fourth wall, and he's like, "What do I have to do to have a good relationship?" And then he's like talking to people on the street. It doesn't really happen, but it's kind of like one of those things, breaking the fourth wall. And I'm going to ask this person. So he finds this couple walking towards him. They're very tall. They're
yeah,
gorgeous. She's like a supermodel, and he's like this athletic guy. He's like, "You two, you look like a happy couple. You know, how do you keep it together?" And he looks at her, and she says, "Well, I'm completely shallow and don't have a thought in my head." And
yeah.
he looks, and then the
And I'm
guy says,
exactly the same.
I'm exactly the same. He's like, well,
Yeah.
I guess it works for you, you know?
Yep.
So probably a statement on that. They have nothing to talk about, so they never do.
It's not just that they're not like just bad people because they're dumb, but they're attracted to one another because of their physical looks, and that's pretty much that's going to be consistent as long
And
as
like
you're
he says, somehow it works for you, right?
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
if one of them were intellectual, it wouldn't work. If either one of them were not the way they are, it only
Right.
works because neither one has anything to say that's, you know, halfway
Hmm.
intelligent. So they're a good looking couple, yuppies basically, or what they
Pretty
might
much.
call WASPs. Remember that acronym? White
Oh
Anglo-Saxon
yeah, yeah.
Protestant.
I was actually thinking about that today because I was thinking about how I've always had this kind of strange relationship to Jewish identity
Hmm.
because my stepdad was Jewish. So I was
Hmm.
raised in a Jewish household with Jewish family members and we celebrated Jewish holidays. I am not ethnically Jewish at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
But now my wife is Jewish and my kids are
Hmm.
Jewish and I run the Seder for Passover.
Hmm.
And so I have this weird relationship with it. And I was thinking that through today. And I was thinking like, well, because in reality I'm a WASP. And then I was like, well, no, I'm not. I'm not Anglo-Saxon. I'm
Right,
white. I'm a
right,
Protestant,
right,
but I'm
right.
like
Well,
Scots Irish. Like it's a different
right.
thing. Not that that matters to anybody
No,
these days, the different
it
kinds
really
of white
doesn't.
people, but
Right. You're not
um
Caucasian either. I mean, that's the thing. It's like all the
oh,
things that they,
don't get me don't get me
yeah,
started on the word Caucasian. That's a
yeah,
terrible one.
Caucasus.
That's some racist thing from the past. But
Yeah.
anyway, but
Well, like I said, that's the crux of the movie. What do you think? By the way, I'm gonna break into our drink. I
oh yeah,
chose
yeah,
something
good
really
idea.
lame.
I actually wasn't
There's
sure why. Is that what they're drinking when they first meet at the apartment?
yeah,
Is that
yeah. So
okay?
she
That's what I
brings
was
out
thinking.
burgundy white wine at the apartment, a half open bottle at her lousy little apartment with bugs in it, and they drink out of. She has a wine glass, and he just has like some dinky glass, and she
Right.
pours them. So, and that's kind of typical. You're in your 20s, and
Yeah.
no money. And anyway, I'm so glad I did because I worked outside a lot this morning, and I'm and
That's not a bad pick for being outside in the New Mexico
chilled
sun.
white wine. That's right. So
What's the
cheers.
temperature today in southern New Mexico?
It's hitting, well, been hitting the 90s. It's slowly
Yeah.
creeping up. So
We haven't really
cheers.
broken into the 80s yet in New York yet, but it'll be there. But so far, it's really been kind of mild,
Oh, much better.
other than
So
the orange
yeah,
firewood
orange
hellscape that
goo.
was going on last week. But
I will
uh,
say there are a lot of cocktails out there. There's a Woody Allen cocktail,
okay,
and it's apparently something that was served in, I think, Midnight in Paris or something like that. One of his other movies. There's also another one that I thought was kind of funny. And that one I thought, that didn't make sense because it was a different movie. And then there's one called The Analyst, which I thought that's kind of funny, because they're always going
called
to an analyst, but it was pretty complicated. And then I thought, well, Woody Allen was the pitchman for Smirnoff in
I didn't
the,
know
I
that.
think, the 50s and 60s. And there are tons of ads for Smirnoff with him in it. Or the other one that he would always pitch was the Moscow Mule, which I think Smirnoff created with the help of a ginger beer company. So I was like, maybe one of those two. But I
Huh.
just figured go with something easy, something from the movie. So when you watch the movie, chill some white wine. I think they drink wine kind of throughout the movie. There aren't really many allusions to cocktails. We could have done cocaine, but I figured, well, this is a family-friendly
Yeah,
podcast,
that might have been a
so
little
maybe
weird.
not.
Remember in Naked Gun when he's like heroin, he's like, well, that's kind of a tall order, Nordberg. I was thinking about that. Like if you were like, get cocaine, it'd be like, it's kind of a tall order, Nordberg. I don't know
Right,
if you can
right,
do
right.
that. So you were asking me what I thought of this movie. So when I was growing up, I remember like I'd get books about the history of movies and the Oscars and stuff. This is for those younger people out there. You couldn't just look up all this stuff on the internet. You had to have this thing made of paper called a book that would have
Right,
ink runes inscribed on it that you could
right.
read and get information from. I used to always read that Star Wars lost Best Picture in 1977 to Annie Hall. And so in my mind, Annie
Yeah.
Hall was this
Huh.
piece of crap movie that I never wanted to watch because it beat Star Wars for Best Picture. I
Yeah.
did finally watch it. I think when I was working at a video store and I was just taking home everything that I'd
Mhm.
ever heard of to watch. It turns out I liked it a lot. I thought it was a really good movie. I was old enough and mature enough to get it and to be able to put myself in the mind of 1977 and enjoy the movie. But I didn't remember a lot other than sort of the one-liners
Yeah.
of the movie. So I was coming to it pretty new this time, fairly new. I've seen a lot of other Woody Allen movies. My dad's a huge Woody Allen fan. So I saw, growing up, I watched Sleeper. I don't remember seeing Bananas. I saw Manhattan. I recently saw Midnight in Paris. That's a good one. I didn't even really realize that was a Woody Allen movie. Match Point is really good. Love and Death. I remember watching that when I was a kid. So I definitely knew Woody Allen quite a bit when I was growing up. My dad had this thing where when I was a little tiny kid, they lived in Iowa, and Woody Allen was supposed to come and do a show at the University of Iowa in the middle of the winter. And so my mom and my dad drove out to Iowa City, which was like an hour away or whatever. They got there and this huge snowstorm hit. So Woody Allen had already gotten to the campus, but only like 10 other people showed up. So Woody Allen went ahead with the show and just sat with my parents and like 8 other people in a room and just talked to them for, did his comedy bit and sort of chatted with everyone for an hour.
Oh, that's cool.
And this would have been in about 1973, 1974 when he was, kind of
Popping.
Starting out. Like not
for sure.
He was definitely a big star already, but this would have been before Annie Hall. So
yeah.
Pretty cool to get to meet him, I think. So
yeah,
he was always fantastic. A big favorite of my dad's.
Yeah, well, I can see that. Geez, by that time he would have had like 3 or 4 movies under his belt, though.
I think so. Yeah, I think he already had done Sleeper and a couple of other things by then.
And I didn't realize that he would sub for Johnny Carson. Like was one of the, every now and then Johnny Carson would be on vacation or whatever, and they would have these guest hosts, and he was one of them. Like he subbed a few times for Johnny Carson.
I'm sorry, you said he subbed, like hosted the show for.
He hosted the show.
Subbed, like for another comedian at the last minute.
No.
Oh wow, that's actually.
And I didn't realize that he was. I mean, I knew about the writing and the directing, but I didn't realize the stand-up comedy, that he was such a prolific comic. He did stand-up with Lenny Bruce and George Carlin and a lot of those pretty cutting-edge comedians of the late '60s. And it makes sense. I mean, it's he was a New York guy, so it's the New York.
And you can tell in Annie Hall, he did a couple of bits getting up on the stage in Annie Hall, and I was thinking, oh, he must have been a stand-up comic. I mean, maybe I already knew that, but I looked up some of his bits on YouTube, and he's really funny. He's funnier.
Oh, he is.
I thought he came across as being funnier than I thought he would be. Like, he's very animated. He tells the stories more. He's not quite as nebbish in the stand-up bits as he is in Annie Hall. He's a lot more animated and like talking. He's actually, I thought, super funny. I thought it's actually more entertaining than I expected. Some of the stand-up comedy from the '60s holds up. I've always just loved Bob Newhart. Like I'll listen to those anytime. But for the most part, you wouldn't expect it to hold up terribly well. Sure. But he's really smart comic, and it comes through. And I thought he was great.
Well, that was sort of what he was known for. I mean, Woody Allen was very much an intellectual, and which is funny because he didn't go to college, which just shows that college has nothing to do with intelligence. But in any case, he
has nothing to do with intelligence, but he definitely comes across. There is no way you could have Woody Allen and not go to college and be from anywhere but New York. His knowledge of the arts is the kind of thing you just could not pick up.
He's well read. I mean, he read voraciously, and he also, and like you said, I mean, so one of the running gags in the movie is there's a documentary they always go to about the Nazis.
What is it called? I was trying to remember. I didn't write it down. It's like the pity and the sorrow or something.
Yeah, pity and the sorrow or something like that.
Sorrow and the anguish or something.
Yeah, something.
That's a really funny bit.
It's like a super depressing 4-hour documentary about the Nazis and the Holocaust and the French and all sorts of stuff.
There's a couple of parts where she'll be like, "Well, then what do you want to do tonight?" And then it cuts to them watching.
It cuts to that, right? Well, and before that, they were at an Ingrid Bergman, like Swedish film, Swedish subtitled film. But the point is, like, he would really do that. He was into that. He would watch foreign films all the time. And so he was very much an intellectual. Voltaire didn't go to college, right? He was just, he learned, right? I don't think he went to college, not by today's standards.
Not by we would call, they had universities in the 70s.
What I'm saying is that the enlightened philosophers, learned. They became learned people, as they would say. Right. But so that certainly comes across. But that was what he was known for in his comedy. His comedy was very highbrow, very intellectual, and a lot of people didn't get it. There were quite a few comics that said that he was brilliant, but they thought the audience was too stupid for him.
Yeah, he was very critical of
Hmm.
the highbrow, like literati types, though.
Hmm.
He's very
Right.
smart and very well and very, I don't, read is the right word, but just really knows a lot about theater
Hmm.
and film and all that stuff that
Hmm.
all the arts in general.
Right.
Basically, my parents used to have this bathroom at their house that was wallpapered in the style section from the New York Times from about 1976 to
Wow.
1981. And so when I was growing up, I would just read these articles all the time. And so it's like that everything that was written on that wall was something Woody Allen might talk about. It's
Yeah.
really funny. Like
Yeah.
when I think back, I see things all the time. And I'm like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, I know
Right.
about that.
Right.
Okay.
Tony Curtis looks exactly like Ron Perlman in this movie. Is that his
Yeah,
name?
Tony Curtis is the guy from
Tony Roberts. No, you're right. Tony
Tony
Roberts.
Roberts. Yeah.
Tony
Yes, Tony Roberts
Curtis.
looks like Ron Perlman is in my notes. I have
Yeah.
that written down here.
Tony Curtis. That's Spartacus, right?
Tony
Is that
Curtis
guy?
was in Spartacus.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Tony Robertson. I saw him and I was like, what? Like
Yep.
that? Is that Ron Perlman? I
I
was like,
wrote the
no.
same thing.
I said he's not that old, is he?
Nope. Quote unquote. He looks a bit like how I would imagine a young Ron Perlman, I wrote.
Right. And,
So,
and then I couldn't
yeah.
believe it because I was like, Ron Perlman would never be in anything this intellectual. I was about to say no offense to Ron Perlman, but honestly, all offense to Ron Perlman. He's not the brightest bulb in the socket. Um,
Nice.
sorry, but he does more of a Hellboy and
Sons of
um,
Anarchy.
Sons of Anarchy and stuff.
The
But
Beast. He played the
he
Beast.
played the Beauty and the Beast. Yeah. Who else is in this movie? You've got Shelley Duvall.
Shelley Duvall shows up, and I was thinking, I thought The Shining was before this, but the book The Shining is before this movie. So it was
The
The
Shining
Shining's
was like
actually from 1980s.
79 or 80s.
80.
Okay.
I,
Okay.
I I
80s.
looked it up because I thought it was weird. I was like, she looks younger than she was in The
Yeah.
Shining, and she is because it's a couple years
Yeah.
before. And Carol Kane is
Carol Kane.
his ex-wife. I don't think I've ever seen her not talk with a weird accent because she plays Latka's girlfriend on Taxi, and
Uh-huh.
she has a weird accent in The Princess Bride, and she
Who
has a
was that?
weird accent in Scrooge when she plays
Yeah,
the
was it Scrooge? I was going to say the
and
ghost of whatever Christmas, whatever present or
like
something
she's
past. Or,
hilarious, but
yeah,
I've
she
never
is
seen her
hilarious. Yeah.
talk like a normal person before, so
Yes.
that threw me off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a whole bunch of famous people. There's a whole bunch of, like Jeff Goldblum has a bit
Jeff
part.
Goldblum, that was great. I like. Yeah, he calls up. He's like, yeah, I've
I
forgotten my
forgot my
mantra
mantra. Yeah. Apparently
impression.
Truman Capote showed up in the movie and I didn't see it. And I also saw that Sigourney Weaver has her first appearance in a film in this movie. And that I actually went back and looked for because I was thinking, God, was I not watching this movie? But it's because she's in the background as his girlfriend
Yeah,
who
total
shows up
background. The Truman Capote is when
uh-huh.
he's remember when he talks to the horse and he's talking
Yeah.
he's just talking to people or talking about people as they're passing by and he's like, "Well, there's the winner of the Truman Capote lookalike contest." That was Truman Capote.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't remember
so
that line, but yeah, that's
huh.
Strange Coincidence is about New York. Do you know what I did for the first time in my life yesterday, right before I came home and watched this movie?
Hold on. Don't tell me. Okay. It's got to be something that was in the movie that's very New Yorkish.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Something very
hold
New
on.
Yorkish.
It
Something very
wasn't in
much in this movie.
it was very much was in the movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not
God.
something they walked past or something obscure. It's a part of the movie, especially of his childhood.
Well, Coney Island. You just told me. Yeah.
Not just Coney Island. I've been to Coney Island
Uh,
dozens of times. It's right by my mother-in-law's place. I'd never ridden the Cyclone in my entire life.
okay. So the
And
Cyclone.
so
All right.
Michelle and I went. We took Cleo. We went to go ride the Cyclone. They wouldn't let her on because you have to be 54 inches. And so
Boo.
Michelle and I we rode the Cyclone yesterday. Michelle grew up right there. I mean, she was a little
Yeah.
baby right across the street.
Uh,
And neither of us had ever been on it before. We just happened to go. And then we put on the movie. I was like, what the? That's so weird.
yeah.
We were
They had
just there.
apartment underneath the Cyclone.
I thought that
Yeah,
was
that
pretty
was
funny. And then
fun.
when they're driving out to Brooklyn to go visit his family,
Uh-huh.
there's a scene where they're driving on the highway, and I was like, "Is that the Belt Parkway? Was that there in the '70s?" And then they drive past the sign for the Fort Hamilton exit, and I was like, "Yep, that's the Belt Parkway.
I was
There's the
there.
Verrazano Bridge. We were just
Yeah.
there today." So
It's kind of funny. And I that's one of the things I enjoyed watching. No, it was when he was reminiscing. It's the very end when he's
uh,
sort of like reminiscing and like, and then we did this and we talked in this cafe or whatever. But there's a
you
part
get the
where,
little montage of the rest of the movie.
yeah,
That part,
but there's a
yeah,
part when they're just sitting there where they're standing off to the side. He uses a lot of negative space, so they'll be off to like the extreme right of the frame, and everything else is going on the rest of the frame.
okay,
And so traffic is going by, and I'm just looking at the cars, I'm like, oh, there's an old Stingray Corvette, and oh, there's an old, Chevy Nova, and like as they're going by, because they're all 70s, right? Now this is 77, so it was shot 76, 75. So they've got cars from 72, 73, pre-embargo, basically. So it's all big
Sure.
cars. It's
Yeah.
kind of funny because this came out when the embargo happened, but all the cars you see were all pre-embargo cars because it was
Mm.
shot before the embargo.
It was
So
shot before, yeah.
yeah, it's just a car geek thing.
Okay, yeah. Well, that
Um,
makes sense. We notice what we're interested in,
I
you
guess
know.
so. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that definitely makes sense to me.
Paul Simon cracked me up. I thought that was
Paul Simon
hilarious.
was pretty
He's
funny. What a
he's kind of
weasel.
creepy producer guy.
I like
He
the idea of complaining that your apartment costs $400 a month.
yes,
I
yes.
was I was thinking, boy, if I had if
Well,
I could find an apartment for $400 a month, why wouldn't I rent that? I would just have that to keep my books or something. That costs
well, and
less than my
those are
storage
the
bin.
throwaway lines that he's famous for. He's like, come on, keep the apartment. Why would you move out of the apartment? He's like, and she's like, well, it's small and filled with bugs. He's like, yeah, but there's no big deal. And she's like, plus that apartment costs $400. And he's like, $400? That's a
It's
small
small
apartment
and
filled
filled
with
with
bugs.
bugs. Yeah, yeah,
So so
that's a well written line.
it's
That's kind of like the line where they're at the analyst. Which, by the way, I didn't realize this, but that's not a split screen. They filmed that scene with a wall
oh
between them.
back to back, really.
Yeah,
That's
back to back,
interesting.
like the two things are going on at the same time. And he's like, and the doctor's like, how often do you have sex? And he's like,
That
oh,
was great.
hardly at all, 3 times a week. And she's like, constantly, 3 times a week.
Yeah, constantly three times
Pretty
a week. Yeah, he's like,
those kind of
yeah.
parallel lines are sort of his signature. I like that.
Could you get away with that nowadays? Because he does a lot of man versus woman in this, right? It's a lot of the battle of the
Well, there's
sexes
people that
type of
complained
stuff.
about it, but I don't know. Stereotypes of men and women, that's pretty normal. I mean, I don't know if would anybody really I mean, somebody would complain,
Oh
but
God, dude,
99
are you
99% of
kidding
people
me?
would laugh along and one person would complain. I don't know
Yeah,
if
but
that's
they'd be the loud lunatic at the back of the theater.
I
Okay, so
suppose so.
just so you know, $400 a month, adjusting for inflation,
Oh, okay.
$2,079.50.
Again, why would I not have an apartment for two thousand
Right.
seventy nine dollars? I mean, that's
Right.
just a small place. I don't know. Maybe you could get an apartment somewhere in New York for that much, like a small place.
You can't get that.
Maybe
You would get Harry
like a
Potter's
one room.
loft under the stairs is what you'd get for maybe. You'd be
I
lucky to
saw
get
stuff.
that.
I saw stuff for rent in Manhattan in the $4,000 to $4,500 range that had more than one bedroom. So I think if you
Interesting.
were out in Brooklyn or something, I think you could probably get something for 2,000 for a
Well
one bedroom
then, but then
somewhere in
the
the
way it
city.
works now though is you've got all the building fees and stuff too. And come Christmas time, you're forking over a ton of money for everybody who works there. If you've got a doorman or anybody.
Only if you own the place. Only if you own the
Well,
place. If you don't
that's
own
true.
the
That's a good
place,
point.
but we don't do any of that. We don't, there's nobody, no. Although that's a pretty good point. We actually have a supervisor that works on the building. We probably should have given him something for Christmas. That would have been nice, but honestly didn't think of it. But anyway,
Oh well.
note to self, don't be such a jerk.
Well, give them a bottle of something.
Where do you land on the New York versus LA in this thing? I mean, you're quasi familiar with both
Mhm.
places, I think,
Yeah.
well enough to comment on it. What do you think?
That's a really interesting. I don't like either place.
Okay.
I'll take that back. I love both places. I would live in neither place.
Uh-huh.
You're looking at 1977, which is a very different environment. When they kept saying that New York is dying, there was urban decay was going on. It was real in New York City. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
palpable. I mean, places were closing, and the middle of
Uh-huh.
the city was just kind of going away. And you had all these like industrial parts in the middle of the city, which was weird, right? Now they're
Mm-hmm.
all condos and stuff, but I mean,
Yeah.
or townhouses or whatever. But at the time, they were like factories, but the factories are closing, and this had already happened to New York. I'm sorry, Detroit. Already happened to Chicago. Like New
Mm.
York was kind of like the last bastion. LA at the time was sort of the land of opportunity in the 70s. That was one of the only places that was still growing. LA wasn't the hellscape that it is now back then. I mean, LA was nice up until it was still in the 2000s. It was still a really nice place, and then
Well,
it
I
kind of
think
went to
for
crap.
me, growing up, California was always the land of the future. Like
Right,
I always felt
right.
like I lived on the East Coast and the East Coast was the past and the West Coast was the future. And I have to say, like in my adult life, I have not felt that way.
Yeah,
I felt like, I mean, I've learned to actually have some positive feelings about Los Angeles from having visited a lot more while living out west. It's harder to get to know Los Angeles. It's harder to get to appreciate it. The weather is phenomenal. I mean,
yeah,
Ezra, you can't.
yeah.
I mean, if you're in New York for the entire year, it's hard not to fantasize about a place like Los
Right.
Angeles, where you could at least
Right.
have some kind of city and have the weather be decent for most of the year.
Mhm.
There's just a lot of problems there, and the whole car thing is kind of lame, and the
Golly. Yeah.
traffic is terrible. I guess what I'm saying is it's gotten to the point where I could list off the pros and cons of both of those places, and New York is way more in a tie with LA than it was when I was a kid. LA
Yeah.
seemed, like you said, like the land of, the land of milk and honey when I was a
Yeah.
kid.
Sure.
And it does not seem like that to me now. It's
Not
cool.
anymore.
It's
Not
cool.
anymore.
It's a cool place in a lot of ways. But
I never
I live
lived
in
in
New
LA.
York. If somebody said you could move to LA tomorrow and live
Mhm.
there, I wouldn't like jump at the chance.
Right.
It wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be 100% an improvement. If you
Not
did it
LA.
during
Yeah. Not
January, I
LA.
might say
Yeah.
yes. But
Right. Yeah.
um
How about during July?
in July, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
New York hits its spots in September and October where it's
I've
better.
never been to New York and not had a wonderful time. But
Well,
you
yeah.
know, the most I've
Fun
ever
all
stayed
year.
is the most I've ever stayed is maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that in New York. But see, I never lived in Southern California. I lived in the Bay Area, which is a totally different experience. It's like a
Totally different
completely different
experience.
state, you know,
Totally
northern
different experience.
California versus they still got a lot of the same problems. I
Mhm.
mean, that's you know, that goes throughout the
Actually,
state.
San Francisco, I think, has some of the problems of both. It's
Yeah,
different in some ways, and it's got some of the weather of Southern California, but not
yeah,
really. And it's tightly packed like New York, and has the dirt and the sort of homelessness and stuff like
yeah,
that that's
yeah,
unavoidable.
yeah.
But it
That's
also
definitely
has some
true.
car problems. It's kind of hard to get around the Bay, and
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, I love that city too. Honestly,
To
if
be
somebody said I could live in San Francisco, I probably would think a lot more seriously about it. I
oof,
really do like San
that
Francisco a
place
lot.
is a war zone, man.
No, I know it is. I
But I
know,
will
but
say this.
it's always been
So
sketchier than New York. In my lifetime,
mhm,
San Francisco has always been scarier than New York.
yeah.
When you walk around San Francisco, I've never been there and not been like, I wish I was armed when I'm walking around the street.
Really?
I've
Well,
never felt
I've
that way
never,
in New York.
I back before it got bad, I was, you know, it wasn't that bad. It's bad now, but I will say this though, there is a real dynamic, and a lot of this movie, and I'm going to put this out there. People might not like this, but it's my
Okay.
observation. This is a very much inside baseball type of movie. This is meta, as we would call it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
This is made about show business. This is a movie about show business insiders, and
Yeah, I think that's
critics
fair.
love that. Okay, critics love that kind of thing for some reason. I don't know why, but it's like Who Framed Roger Rabbit was all inside baseball type of stuff. They loved it. Anytime you have a movie that has that kind of dynamics, La La Land or whatever, they love it.
Mhm.
Like
Oh yeah.
because they're part of it. I mean, they're
Right.
part of that world,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so this movie on the East Coast, you've got Broadway, you've got stand up, and you've got writing. On the West Coast, you've got sitcoms, you've
Right.
got the Tonight Show, and you've got music, right? And that is still sort of the divide. I mean, if you're a writer, all the publishing houses are still in New York, unless you're a writer of sitcoms and that kind of crap. Then it's all on the West Coast, right?
Mhm.
With the studios. Even the new studios are out there. Although Amazon and I think Netflix are building something here in New Mexico, but
Okay.
the main motherships are still in California. But if I want to go to like HarperCollins, or I want to pitch, Hatchet Books or something like that, I have to go to New York, because
Uh-huh.
that's where they're all at. So that divide is still very much there. And obviously Broadway and live type of acts, it's all still in New York. So that it's funny because this is 1977, and that's sort of the dynamic or dichotomy, I guess, rather than dynamic, but the dichotomy that he's presenting, and that still
Mhm.
exists, which is how many years later, 50 years, 40 years later. I found that interesting that hasn't changed. When you're in those worlds, something else I'll say about the apocalypse of downtown LA and the
Uh-huh.
apocalypse of Central Park, if you're in a bubble, you're in those worlds and you're doing well, you really don't see that. It doesn't really affect you that much.
You're
For
talking
that,
specifically about the forest fire smoke thing, or
no. I'm talking about like the homeless and the meth
oh,
heads and all that other stuff that
we don't.
that's going on.
To be honest, we don't have that here.
Yeah.
You don't see
Well,
that in New York.
in LA, you
But
got it. But the
I mean, there
problem,
are
I think,
homeless people here, but it's just like it always was. We don't have the encampments of homeless people like you see. Like DC has that. Like I've been back
yeah,
to DC a bunch of times recently, and I would say it has changed a lot more than New York. New York looks like
LA's definitely got it.
I've
And
heard that.
all I'm saying is that if you're in the world of entertainment and you're doing
Mhm.
well, which both Annie Hall and his buddy Rob and so forth. If you're like them, Paul Simon, you don't
Mhm.
see it. It doesn't affect you because you don't live in that world, right, man? You're up in the hills.
I think that's more notable about Los Angeles. I think in LA, people can
Yeah.
remove themselves. And I think unless you're like when Donald Trump is going around Manhattan, he's in an armored limo and does not
Yeah.
interact with the city. But
Right.
but you see celebrities just walking down the street here. And
Mhm.
they're, I think, almost, even on the train, you see people and they're just as they're confronting all the stuff the same as anybody else. And I think
Right.
people are more likely to take a car these days because of Uber, but you're pretty much in the thick of things in New York. It's kind of hard to get away from whatever's going on, and I think that's why New York has always remained a little more sane than some of these other places, because there's always this element of things go to heck a little bit, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, well, wait a minute, I got to ride the train. Yeah, that's great, defund the police and everything, but I'd like to survive my daily commute, so
Yeah.
we do
Yeah.
need police. Like, so it only lasts, it goes back to normal pretty fast here because you just
Mhm.
have to get by. Like, there's no, it's why people are more socially liberal, but it's also why people are, at the end of the day, they're pretty conservative in terms of, like, I think everybody realizes this place would fall apart pretty fast if
Yeah.
we didn't have some kind of, civilization
Well,
keeping
there's
things.
yeah, New York has, and we'll get off New York, ladies and gentlemen, in just a minute,
Yeah,
talking
that's
about the
true. We're not
movie here.
really
But I'll
talking
just
about
say
the,
that
yeah.
there is a special kind of social contract in New York that I've never felt anywhere else. Yeah, there's a contract, a social contract where, you're expected to do certain things, expected to get out of the way if somebody's in a hurry getting off the train early in the morning. There are certain expectations of you being there. And I think if everybody holds that contract, everything's smooth, right? Everything
Mm.
runs well. There are certain monkey wrenches that are thrown in, like crazy people going down the subway platform
Oh
and so
yeah.
forth, which is, serious stuff. But for the most part, I think you're right. I've never felt that anywhere else. There's not this kind of camaraderie of people because we live in the same city, anywhere else other than New York City. So, all right. So that aside,
Right.
we've talked about Rob. All right. So tell me your laugh out loud moments on this movie. I had a few.
So there's some that are just on the surface of it super funny still to
Okay.
this day. A lot of
Like
it
what?
is you have to put yourself in the mentality. Well, you don't have to. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to. You can laugh at this movie on the surface, but if you put yourself in the mindset of what you would have seen in 1977 being done in comedy, it
Uh-huh.
becomes ridiculously funny. You could realize how this would have hit you. The only thing I've ever seen that kind of compares to it is the first time I saw Train Spotting. I
Mm.
remember thinking, I've never seen anything like
Yeah.
this. This
Yeah.
is this is
It
the
was
way
over
they're
the
doing
top.
this movie.
Over the
It's
top. Yeah.
hilarious, and the everything metatextual
Yeah.
about it is just perfect, and I just love it. But
You fall
this
into a
movie,
toilet.
the bit where they're in the elementary school classroom
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and he tries to kiss the little girl,
He
and he's
kisses
and
the
he's
little
like
girl.
I just had like a healthy sexual curiosity, and the little girl's like, oh come on, even Freud talked about a
Yeah,
latency,
I know.
kid.
Right. Right.
Like that
Right.
stuff's pretty, even putting that stuff into the
Yeah.
mouths of children is pretty funny today, and it would have been really
Yeah.
funny 50 years ago, so
Right.
that's some of the, and like I said, the lines, like you said, the parallel lines that we talked about before are just really well written and just still funny. They're like, I don't know, the best lines of Shakespeare that occasionally hold up and are still funny, because they're just
Mhm.
so well crafted that they hit you. They're like, yes, that's funny. That's what you maybe don't. It's not like being punched in the gut and you want to laugh out loud, but you appreciate it. You're like, ah, yeah, that's
Well,
pretty darn.
there are some stupid slapstick moments that I
Uh-huh.
saw coming, but it still made me laugh. The cocaine scene.
The cocaine bit is probably
I,
the number
I mean,
one. Yeah,
it's just like you knew that was going to happen, but
yep.
I still laughed. I still guffawed.
They had to rewrite that scene, or they didn't, not rewrite it, but they had to sort of reshoot it because
Uh-huh.
the crowd laughed so hard that it ate up a couple of the funnier lines that happened right after that.
Oh,
So
afterwards,
they
so
had
he
to
had to
they had to
pause.
add in
Oh,
a
they
longer
had to
pause.
stop. Yeah, they just had to
Yeah.
stop it. Yeah,
So
that I think the psychologist or the analyst part, where how often do you have sex?
yes,
Hardly
yeah,
ever. 3 times a week, all the
yeah.
time, 3 times a week.
Constantly, yeah.
That made me laugh out loud.
Yep.
That one part where they're in the theater, and I can't remember the guy who he was referencing. There's this film
Marshall
critic behind
McLuhan,
him.
where he
Yeah,
calls in
Marshall
Marshall
McLuhan. He's like,
McLuhan to
well,
help him
Marshall
out. Yeah, that's
McLuhan thinks
that's a
blah
good
blah. He's
bit.
like,
Yeah.
you don't know anything about me. He's like,
You don't
how did they
understand
let
my
you
work at
teach
all.
anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
That's great. That's
Because it's
classic.
all
I mean, I think
it's all fantasy.
anybody could relate to
It's
that.
all stuff that you want to happen. Like you
Right.
would love to be able to do that kind of crap.
Yes.
Funny. It's childish and funny.
Those are good. I think anybody who's
Yeah.
ever had an argument over Facebook, which I think is everyone, in the
Yeah.
last 20 years. Would love to have to be able to bring Marshall McLuhan in to just shut
Right.
somebody up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I
But I
think
think
that's
it's so much better to do it in person though. He's like, "Oh, really?
oh yes.
Really? Oh, I've got him right here."
Oh
He pulls
yes.
him out
Oh
from
yes.
behind the sign. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So stupid. I mean, and that's the thing, it's just dumb and funny. Okay,
So
so
we
okay,
need to talk. I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room a little bit, though. I think we need to talk
okay,
about Woody Allen. How are you? How did you do with watching Woody Allen in this movie?
okay.
And how much do you know, and how much are you aware of the story, like the
All right.
behind the camera?
I'm going to use a scene in the movie to segue into that. Okay.
Okay, okay,
There's a scene in the movie where it's towards the end of the movie. Woody has been, or Alvy has been arrested, put in jail because he
right,
bumper carred a bunch of cars and then tore up his driver's license in front of the cop and says, "I just have a problem with authority." And so his friend Rob gets him out. Okay.
right.
Do you remember what Rob tells him he was doing when Woody called when Alvy
Yes,
called? Okay. How
yes,
okay. So he
yeah. You're
says
right.
he tells Alvy, he's like, "Alvy, what do you think I was doing
Yeah,
when
right.
you called me?" And he's like, "I don't know, probably with the girl." And he says, "Twins, Alvy."
Yeah.
And then what was the next thing out of his
And
mouth?
then he says they were 16. Yeah,
They
that's
were 16. The mathematical
yep.
possibilities were endless.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. This is 1977,
Yeah.
Dave.
Yeah.
This isn't 1907.
Which may or may not, depending on where you live, be criminal. I don't think that
Oh,
actually is criminal in most places, weirdly enough. And
that's well,
I can't
okay.
remember why, but we had to look this up. We had to look
That
this up for
dude's
one of these shows. And I was like,
yeah.
God, I wish this wasn't in my search history. But
Right. There is no way though that Tony Roberts' Rob is a day less than like 43 years old in
oh
that
yeah, no,
in that
they're old guys.
movie. 16 years old, twins.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
Yep.
that's what Woody Allen wrote in 1977. He wrote that scene. He could have
Might have
said
been
17.
Brickman. It might have been Brickman that wrote it.
He could have well, he could have said, well, that's a bit much.
Woody Allen might have
Although
written they were 9 and Brickman changed
although
it.
as we've talked about, what's her name in Indiana Jones was supposed to be 16 as well.
Yeah, or yeah, very young. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
so
Yes.
there's I don't know, but in any case, so now the elephant in the room is Woody Allen likes young people,
Well,
perhaps.
so okay, so all I know about is I know about obviously, I mean, the big one is that he married his stepdaughter, which
Yeah,
just how does that happen? How do you let that? I don't
I don't
understand
know.
that. Like,
I don't
how
know.
do you
No, no.
ever think that's okay? How do
So
you? I don't.
there's some other weird parts. Okay, so Mia
No, there's
Farrow's it was
more. There's more, but
so it was Mia Farrow's stepdaughter. It wasn't his stepdaughter.
no,
He
it was
wasn't he.
It was Mia Farrow's adopted daughter, and then
Okay,
oh no, wait, he never actually married Mia
they never
Farrow. Did he?
married. They
Yeah,
never
that's right.
married. Okay,
Okay, okay, fair enough,
so
fair
there's
enough.
some weird parallels here. There's a whole discussion in Annie Hall about you have your apartment, I have my apartment. Okay,
Okay,
he and Mia Farrow had apartments on the opposite sides of Central Park. They didn't live together.
okay,
He would go over and sleep with her. She'd go over and sleep with him. They did not live together. It was like right out of that movie. I mean, it was a philosophy. I think that was his real philosophy. Like,
okay.
you have your place, I have my place. We're not going to marry. And so, but I think so. He adopted. Okay, so Ronan Farrow, I believe, is his child. I
Okay,
think
so there's questions about that.
maybe not.
Ronan
Looks
Farrow
nothing
is
like him. I will say
Ronan
that.
Farrow is acknowledged as being Woody Allen's son, but Woody
Yeah.
Allen himself has pointed out the fact that he believes Frank Sinatra is Ronan Farrow's father.
Well, I will
And
say he looks more like Frank
if you look at
Sinatra
the pictures, if you look at the pictures
than
of young Frank
Woody Allen.
Sinatra and Ronan
Yeah,
Farrow next to each other,
yeah.
I think it'd be
Striking.
more likely it'd be some stranger that looks a lot like Frank
Right.
Sinatra, who
Right.
is Ronan's father, but it's uncanny.
He looks
So
nothing like
he looks
Woody
nothing like
Allen.
you don't
He
get
has
Mia
no
Farrow
features
plus
at
Woody
all.
Allen. You
Yeah.
do not get
No features at
Ronan.
all.
No,
And then also Mia Farrow's daughter, he
right.
adopted. And then
Okay.
another girl that Mia Farrow adopted, no, another son, I think, that Mia Farrow adopted, he also adopted. So he is,
Okay.
but they were never married. It's really weird. So they weren't married, they didn't live together. And this
Sunyi.
Sun Yi was an adopted daughter
Right.
from Mia Farrow and a previous husband.
Yes.
Okay.
And like from reading about her history,
Mhm.
clearly a horribly traumatized child
Yeah, very, very,
from
very
what happened to
traumatized.
her. I think
Yeah.
she was adopted when she was somewhere between 5 and 7 years old, but was living on the streets, like eating out of garbage cans, and
I
was.
think she saw her parents killed in front of her,
I don't
and
remember what
just
happened to her, but she was non-literate. She was not able to speak any
yeah,
language when she came to
yeah.
America. I mean, really, really vulnerable person, you'd have
Hmm.
to assume.
Right.
And that's that whole situation is just
Yeah.
super, super
So
creepy.
I've read his.
It's almost as if the rules about getting married and having children when you're married are designed to prevent there being strange conflicts of parentage and like
Right.
who, it's almost like families don't work very well if you don't have some rules structuring them.
Yeah.
And you're not
Yeah.
just, everybody's dating each other and running across the park to find a girlfriend and who's got an
Yeah.
adopted kid from four different, it's almost like
Mhm.
that's not a great idea, but whatever. Maybe I'm just
Maybe
maybe I'm
you're
just an old man.
old fashioned dude. His statements and from what he's written about it, said about it, and everything else, he absolutely believes there's just nothing wrong with what he did. They fell in love with each other. I don't know. I'm not going to defend the guy. Weird. It's weird. The other elephant though is the potential molestation of
Yeah, the other
Pharaoh's
daughter.
daughter. What was her name? I can't remember.
She has a
I'll
daughter
get
named
the
Ronan. The son
no.
is named Ronan, and the
Yeah,
daughter has a name that sounds like a boy's name because that's who I looked up first when I heard
Dylan. Is it
about
Dylan?
it. Dylan. Yes, Dylan. Right.
Dylan. Okay, Dylan.
That's it.
Yes, yes. Thank you. So Dylan Farrow has accused Woody of molesting her.
Right. And a babysitter was a witness to some of the behavior and stuff like it. But somehow the court didn't find it as being. They
Yeah,
didn't convict him or
there have
charge
been
him
like
with
I
anything.
think two or three different investigations, the court, the state, and the police or something like that, and they've all dismissed it. They've said that
Right.
she was untrustworthy as a witness, and something about the babysitter being paid off or something like that for it. Apparently, this all came about when he and Mia Farrow were in the midst of a big
Right.
schism, and that's when all this happened. So that throws suspicion on it as well.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things like, I don't know. We talked about Roman Polanski. What he did, definitely he did, which was sodomize a
Yeah.
14-year-old girl.
Yeah, I don't think
Um,
there's much question about that.
yeah, no,
He's
he
and
absolutely
it was
did it.
not even remotely arguably okay, or
No, no,
there's
he
no
trained, he
mitigating circumstances.
drugged her, and
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
Angelica Houston walked in on him, said, "This is what happened." So that's a different story, right? Bill Cosby, for those he was found guilty for,
yeah.
they were legitimate. There's a lot of accusations. I don't know, but those he was found guilty for certain ones. This one's a weird one. There's a lot of accusations, a lot of innuendo. I don't know, man. And
But it's like
I think,
it's what I'm saying about it. If you have this bohemian belief that
mhm.
family structures are outdated things and you should just sleep with whoever you want to sleep with and blah 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 blah, this is the kind of crap that happens
Yeah, this
because you
is.
say to
Yeah,
yourself,
absolutely.
"Hey, why, I'm not technically her father. I'm not
Right.
married to her mother.
Right.
Why not go out with and
She's
whatever.
over 18. He waited until
Frankly,
she was 18. She's waited until she was
frankly, the
18.
age
So
difference, I don't care. That's fine.
yeah,
That's legal. That's fine.
yeah.
Two consenting adults. It's a little creepy. I myself, I'm 45. If I was ever single, I sure as heck wouldn't date a 21-year-old. That would be really
Right,
weird, and I
right,
wouldn't have anything to talk to them about. But
right.
it's legal. But he should have just been like, no, what? Why does this need to be a part of my life? Why do I need to be involved in this kind of thing? And it
Well,
almost certainly to me is that something was going on before, and especially because there's a pattern of him being accused of this sort of thing. To me, the reason why people are accusing him multiple times of molesting children is because he's probably molesting children, and it's pretty
yeah,
hard to prove in a court of law. But
right.
that seems to me like something pretty bad. And people who joke about being perverts oftentimes actually are.
Yeah,
You know, you're talking about, there's the thing you said about the 16-year-old. There's the thing about he kissed a girl when he was 6 years old
yeah,
because
yeah.
but that to me, like I said, where there's smoke, there's fire. I think there's probably something going on
Right.
there. So we're getting kind of close to our time.
We
Did you have
are.
anything that surprised you here? Or do you have anything else you wanted to say about
Well, no,
that
this
discussion?
this
Because
is yours. This is yours.
that,
What's your biggest
that's a
surprise?
pretty important part of this discussion of Woody Allen and the
Mhm.
molestation accusations is pretty important. So is there anything else that you wanted to say about that before we move on to the biggest surprise?
No, that has been flogged in cultural media over and over and
Mhm.
over, and I don't think it'll ever be settled. This is one of those things that
No.
I don't think it's ever going to be settled because it hasn't yet.
Hmm.
And beyond that, I think Woody Allen has a lot of people that really back him. So
Mhm.
I don't. He's not. When I say canceled, I'm just saying that there's a movement to cancel him. It didn't really happen. But I
No,
think
I mean,
there are
and this,
those like if you say around a certain company, oh, I love Woody Allen, I think that you would get
yeah.
looked at askew, if you know what I mean. So,
Well, it's
um,
like I told you before. Rosemary's Baby is like one of my wife's favorite movies.
mhm,
Like I'll come
right.
home and just see her watching that movie. She just loves that movie, and she knows about Roman Polanski and completely disapproves. But
That's a great
you know,
movie.
and Woody Allen, this whole thing came out like in the late '90s. Is
Yeah.
that does that
Yeah.
sound right? And
Yeah.
and he's
Mid to
had
late 20s.
big films, successful
Yeah.
films. Match Point is
Since then.
2003 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Since then.
Midnight
Yeah.
in Paris is 2011. I mean, he's put out
Right.
movies since then that have been critically well received.
Yeah.
To some extent, I think it's because people always loved him so much, and he makes very good movies. He's very funny, but it's also because maybe they just kind of don't believe it, choose not to believe it.
Mhm.
I don't know. But anyway, so biggest surprise, anything you hadn't seen this, so you were coming into it pretty cold.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't seen it. I guess my biggest surprise was, and this is sort of the movie, but I
Uh,
didn't realize how prolific he was.
uh-huh.
The
Yeah,
guy worked his butt off.
right.
He started writing when he was, I think, 15 or 16, started writing jokes and selling them to comedians. By the time he was 18, he was writing stuff like monologues for different, different, not the Tonight Show, but different shows like that, and
Mhm.
writing stand up and writing skits and writing. I mean, the guy was just a phenom at
And
an
we didn't
early
even talk
age.
about his theater career. His theater career
Yeah,
is huge.
yeah. Oh yeah, huge
Huge.
theater
He,
career.
he's in
Um,
Play It Again, Sam, which he wrote and directed on Broadway. Diane Keaton and I
mhm.
don't remember Robert's first name. Tony Roberts.
Tony
They were
Robbins,
both
yeah,
in that production. That's where he met
right.
them. He had this very successful theater period before he
Yeah,
started
well, Played
making
Against
movies.
Sam was hugely successful,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's where Diane Keaton like launched her career from.
right.
I think that's where the two of them like sort of began.
Probably, yeah.
I had no idea, and like and then the stand up comedy too. Add
Hmm.
on top of that, so he was writing just like in Annie Hall. He was writing for comedians. He's like, these guys suck, I can do this myself. And so he did it himself and was even better at it, and became a very prolific comedian, but wasn't satisfied with that. Started writing movies and then started
Hmm.
directing movies. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a reason why he's put on a mountain, right? He's like a Mount
Yeah,
Rushmore of,
yeah,
of comedy
yeah.
geniuses. And,
Yeah,
uh, and
he's one of the 10 most important figures, maybe in American arts in the 70s.
is he like kind of our Oscar Wilde type of guy,
It's not a bad
maybe?
comparison. It's not a bad comparison, and probably for the time, Oscar Wilde's life would have been equally controversial, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
for
he had
sure.
the
Yeah.
the conviction for
Mhm.
homosexuality and things like
Right.
that. Like,
Yeah.
so to people living then, they probably would have said, "Oh, well, he should be canceled because of his
Yeah.
horrible behavior." But we'll
Yeah.
look at, and I don't
But
mean
he's
to
so
compare
good.
the I don't mean to compare
Yeah.
those two things. Those are not the same
Yeah.
thing.
Sure. Sure.
But
Yeah.
you're talking about community standards and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which differ over
Well,
the years, which is a whole different interesting discussion about
right.
canceling somebody is community standards. But anyway, my biggest surprise, and I'm going to keep it small. There were, I'd seen this before. One of the biggest ones is how funny it remains after all these
Mhm.
years, and how it really did, I think, deserve Best Picture for that year, despite going up against Star Wars, which was an equally huge and influential movie. But I never thought about before how this movie. So one movie I really like from the '80s, When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah.
Love that movie. Like,
Oh, yeah.
terrific movie. That movie's like almost a remake of Annie Hall.
Yeah.
It's so much like Annie Hall.
Yeah.
It's got a few different themes, but otherwise, there's the L.A. New York thing. There's the Jewish guy and the not. You know what? That's not true. I don't remember if Billy Crystal's character is Jewish, but he seems
I
like
don't know. It
Kurt.
seems it.
There's a guy named Ira, but that's not actually his character. Anyway, let's leave that aside. But it's very similar, and it has the
Yeah.
flashbacks to when they're young, but they're still played
Mhm.
by them as adults. It's very, very
Right.
similar movie, but and
Yeah.
equally, I think, an intelligent script and a really funny movie that holds up. But anyways, that surprised me. I hadn't really thought of those two things together. I guess we should probably talk about whether or not we're going to toast this one.
Well, that's up to you.
And
Now, the way this works, ladies and
should we
gentlemen,
just
if
leave aside the
oh,
question of whether we cancel Woody Allen and just talk about this movie without
well,
that?
we always have before when we talked about Bill
Okay.
Cosby, we
Talked about
we
Bill
talked
Cosby
about
and
him
we
as
okay.
a comedian, and we talked about his work. Actually, we didn't talk about him as a comedian. We talked
Right.
about the particular work, and it was to my brother, whatever, whom I slept
To
with.
my brother Russell, with whom I slept with.
Slept
Yes.
with, right? Same
Which
with
is
George
by
Carlin.
far our most popular episode ever, by the way. So
Well,
hopefully talking about a
yeah.
controversial figure accused of, sexual crimes is the
Right,
ticket to
right,
having a big episode.
right.
So we'll see.
Or potentially, yeah.
Right.
I guess we can't do anybody who's proven. But in any case, so we are toasting the movie,
Uh-huh.
not Woody Allen.
Not the guy. Okay, right. We'll just
Right.
talk about the movie. So
Okay.
I just before you get into yours, because you're the deciding vote.
No, you are. This is my pick.
Oh, you're right. Oh, see, I'm
Yeah.
thinking of this as being something that's so much from my background that I think of this as being my
Right.
pick, but this was totally your pick,
Yeah.
wasn't it? This movie's still funny. Woody Allen is a huge cultural force and a cultural icon. There's a statue of him in Oviedo, Spain, and you know exactly
Wow.
who you're looking at when you see this bronze statue of Woody Allen.
Yeah.
There's nobody else who looks like Woody Allen. If this hadn't happened, this whole crazy thing, he'd be like considered a national treasure, I think, today, like Bob Hope or something.
Right.
This whole thing that we've talked about has kind of ruined that legacy to some extent. If nothing else, it's ruined that legacy. Nobody ever said anything like that about Bob Hope that I'm aware of. This film is, I think, brilliant. I think it really takes in a lot of things that were going on in really serious film and introduced them to American movie audiences for the first time. It's not the first time you ever saw somebody break the fourth wall, probably, but that used along with bringing in almost like a Romana Clay, where like Marshall McLuhan shows up in the middle of the movie and Truman Capote walks by. And
Yeah.
they're these cultural figures, people in the cultural discourse. I just think all of that's brilliant, and I think it holds up. And if you can't realize it's brilliant, you need to sit down and think about where people would have been sitting in a movie theater in 1977, which is kind of the same thing you have to do with the first Star Wars film. When you watch that, you have to be like, what had you seen before 1977? You never saw anything that compared to either two of these films. These films are gigantically different than anything that came before. And I think that I think we got to vote for it. I think Annie Hall deserved to win the Best Picture. I think it's a classic film. I think it might stand up as his, if it's not his best movie, it's like his flagship.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really like Match Point. I thought Match Point was terrific, and I really enjoyed Midnight in Paris, and I enjoyed Sleeper and a couple of things before this. But this is his flagship movie, and I might show this to somebody if they didn't know who Woody Allen was, and be like, "This is who Woody Allen is," and also the raping children. But other than that, as a director and an actor, as a director and an actor, this is who he is. So I'm going to go ahead and raise my glass, or my my free Yankees cup, as is my wont to drink from lately. So
cheers.
Cheers.
Well,
toasting the classic stamp of approval on this one.
I'm glad to hear it. I like okay, slip that one part in. We will leave that part out.
I'm not cutting that. I'm not cutting that part out.
Yeah.
That's going to stay in my appraisal of the movie. I think it's only fair that I mentioned that he does have
got to leave that part in. That's right.
Yeah. So
well, fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Our next episode is coming up. What are we going to do for the next one?
Next episode is going to be a free choice, and I am going to a particular concert in the near future as a birthday gift. So we're going to be doing the 1989 Cure album Disintegration. We're going to talk about that next time on Toasting the Classics. So
can't wait.
For Dave McArthur, I'm saying goodbye.
And for Clint Lanier, thank you for joining us, everybody.
Peace out, everybody.
Bye.
That's it for episode 79 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some lime juice, triple sec, and vodka and mix them up for our discussion of the 1989 Cure album Disintegration. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know your thoughts on Woody Allen's work and problematic biography. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @reactivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.